Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Dane Zorko here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Roy Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Gorn, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Nat Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Hey friends, you've got MJ from the Coaches Panel and a fascinating player for us to look at today in the 50 most relevant, number 37. Gosh, we're making our way through this, almost a third of the way through. Jarryd Lyons. He was elite for us last year. He was one of the best midfielders, and why is it nobody's talking about him? Yeah, I know he might be relatively low in the 50 most relevant based on what he's delivered, but you got to talk about Jarryd Lyons this preseason. And that's almost the whole idea of this podcast and the article at coachespanel.tv is, at the very least, consider what Jarryd Lyons could be. Joining me back on this episode, he's been on a few times now throughout the 50 most relevant. He'll be on a bunch more before we round out the 50. I've got Kane back. Hello, mate.
Hello, MJ. Another player that's awfully interesting and another one that probably flies under the radar. Like you mentioned, it doesn't seem like anyone ever really gets on to reap the rewards of the numbers that this guy puts up.
Nobody's deep diving into Jarryd Lyons. There is a narrative that exists that it was everything worked out for him. No kneel. He had the monopoly. He had and some of those things I think have some credit. But I also think there's some myths in there that hopefully along the way throughout this episode will bust some of those. Let's dive into what he did deliver for us last year. 29 years of age as a midfielder, and he gave us his career high AFL fantasy scores last year and AFL DreamTeam scores. It was a 161 against the North Melbourne Footy Club, while his top SuperCoach score last year was a 152. That's not, though, his career SuperCoach score, though. His career ever score was a 165 against the Kangaroos all the way back in 2019. And last year's PB was a career PB, 161 in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. He's pricey, that's for sure, priced at 117 across the format for you, and he's going to set you back $640,100 in SuperCoach, just over $980,000 in AFL Fantasy, and he just misses out being the third $1 million player in Dream Team at $998,400. And Kane, our Patreons will be aware of this because you and I put together a list of the 50 best keeper league prospects to go out and own and to pursue. And we kind of put them into, I think it was 7 or 8 different tiers. We're not going to give away where we had Jarryd Lyons. If you want to join the Patreon supporter group at coachespanel.tv, you can go and check that out. But one of the things you and I were bullish on talking about of targeting and identifying players in keeper leagues is you want a guy that can score in every capacity, in every column, that if something gets limited, whether it's tackles drop off or marks drop off or kicks drop off, they still find a way to deliver premium scores. And arguably, Jarryd Lyons is probably one of the best components of those multi-column scoring across all the formats.
Yeah, it's exactly how you draw it up, MJ. You know, this is a guy that last year averaged 16 kicks, 12 handballs, 28 touches right there, 5 marks, 7 tackles, and half a goal a game. Yeah. So it's about as good as you can get. Another thing that we did touch on in that Keeper League podcast was if you can get your marks, your tackles, and your goal tally,
those 3
double digits collectively, you're a really good chance to be a 110 guy. So it's probably no surprise with Jarryd Lyons over 12 that he is one of the best midfielders and scorers in the game. And like you mentioned, he's just really hard to stop for that reason. And stop scoring, because he's never out of it. And he's a guy that doesn't even play that much time on ground relative to some of the other mids. He's a guy that really hovers in the low 80s. And I think the thing you notice with him is when he's on the field, he always seems to be scoring. Like, he's such a good tackler. He gets so many holding the balls from that. He's always getting those little squirty kicks out of packs and out of congestion. And you just think, it's just always ticking over. It's just always ticking over when he's on the ground, his score. And he's a player that's never going to get the tag
Never. Yep.
in that midfield. Not with Zorko, not with McCluggage, not with Neil.
No.
All of those guys. And again, not to say he's not damaging, but it's the nature of
How he scores, yeah.
It's not conducive to tagging to limit a player like Jarryd Lyons. So as a result, he doesn't get that attention. And again, the low score of 84, 4 of his other
in
scores
DT,
that weren't tons were 90 plus, and you throw in 16 tons in DT. Like, that is just, you want a player that's at this price and at this average to be a captaincy option.
And he is.
And that's exactly what Lyons is. He is a genuine captaincy option every time he takes the field.
Yeah, it's so true, man. You mentioned that average of 117 in Dream Team and Fantasy. 16 tons, 10 over 120, 4 over 140. To put that into some percentages, 62% of times last year that he turned up, he turned that into something you probably could have put the captaincy on at over 120. Just the 2 scores under 90 all year and did not drop under 84. Like Jack Steele, the number 1 player in Dream Team and Fantasy, doesn't have the basement that he does and arguably might not have the same ceiling. Pre-buy, if you want to look at his seasonal splits, he averaged in the first 12 games 111, so perfectly respectable. But in the final 10 games of the year after the buy, went at 123. And I think in the last 5 games of the year was the number 1 scoring player in AFL Fantasy and Dream Team. He was elite. 3rd in that format for averages in the game. Only Tuke Miller and Jack Steele had higher averages, and he's ranked 2nd for total points in Dream Team and Fantasy, less than 100 points away from the number 1 player in that format of the game in Jack Steele. Let's talk about his SuperCoach numbers before I get some more of your take on what he's like as a player. An average of 115, 19 tons in that format. He started the year with 10 consecutive hundreds, 11 tons over 120, 5 over 135, just the 3 scores below 100 all year, and nothing under 81. Averaged 119 in the first 12 games, 115 in the last 10. Ranked 8th overall in SuperCoach for averages, 6th for all midfielders, 7th for total points across SuperCoach, and he scored more last year in SuperCoach than Tom Mitchell, Sam Walsh, and Rory Laird. Oh, and just to re-highlight what we mentioned at the top about how he scores in every available column, just 6 times last year. Just 6 times. Knowing, remember, 19 SuperCoach tons, 16 Dream Team and Fantasy tons. In only 6 games did he have 30 possessions or more. So it's not like it's like unprecedented Matt Crouch, Tom Mitchell, you'll never achieve this possession count. He just gets it done everywhere. And, Kane, nobody's talking about him.
No, he's certainly a player that, as I mentioned at the top, MJ, it seems like the season goes by and we look at the average at the end of the season and we think, did anyone own him? Did anyone actually get to experience, you mentioned that last 5 games, number 1 in the competition, average of 133.
In Dream Team and Fantasy, yeah.
That was 4 clear of Jack Steele in second, who we know had a monster
Back
second half of the season. You look at the past 2 years, only Jack Steele and Jack McRae have scored more total points in DT than Lyons. So this is a guy that pretty much has been at the real pointy end, clearly in the top 8 midfielders.
Yes, across
and
formats.
Yet, no one's owning, no one's listening, and it seems like every year we make excuses for why he can't do it again, and he proves us wrong. Again, I think the one you mentioned at the start of the podcast was, Lachie Neale didn't play as many games as he usually does last year, but I looked at the numbers with Neale in the team and with Neale out of the team, and
nothing.
Jarryd don't change. Jarryd was 117. Again, you want to know the player that actually did get changed by Neale's absence? It was actually Mitch Robinson.
Yeah, he got the boost.
He went at 71 in the 15 games with Neale and went at 92 in the 7 games without him. So if you had him in draft and you picked up on that trend, he became a very easy player to start when Lachie Neale was out of the side. And, if Neale was in the side, he was practically unfieldable. So Jarryd Lyons is playing his role practically regardless of anyone else in the team. He is, alongside Neale, their top centre-bounce player. We just mentioned how he fills all the categories. I think it's the turnover in the other spot that is the most interesting at Brisbane. You know, Zorko was a regular last year. McCluggage, Berry when fit, Zach Bailey all got some time.
Yep.
And then the likes of Devon Robinson and Reece Matheson really only got opportunity
With
when
injuries.
Berry and when Berry and Neil were out of the team. So don't think that, you know, Jarryd Lyons is, you know, I think he's elevated himself to be one of their really important players. And you know, with their forward line, giving it just some supply. You know, you give Charlie Cameron enough supply. You know, you give Joe Danaher enough supply. These type of guys,
Yeah.
you're going to be in a lot of games, and that's exactly what Lyons is good at. Again, he complements a Zorko, Neil.
He does.
He doesn't take away all the stuff he does. He's a lot of grunt. You know, he doesn't need big time on ground. He can just come in, and he just makes the most of his opportunity. He comes in, he scores when he's on, he goes off, he helps the midfield. And as I mentioned, he doesn't get those tag games, and we know how important that is. If you're throwing in a 60 or even a couple of sub-80 scores, it's really hard to be an elite premium.
Yes.
Because you have to have such a big ceiling to offset it, and it's just really, really tricky to do. So when Lyons doesn't get that attention, that's why he just goes about his business and keeps being his top scorer, and I don't see that changing.
Well, and that's got to be the conversation for us, because he scored, if we look over these past 2 years, he's had just 7 games in SuperCoach that he hasn't turned up. That's 82% of the time. Like, that's in that McRae territory of conversion rate. It's not as strong in Dream Team and Fantasy due to the shortened quarters, and I don't think the adjusted averages do him justice, because, as you've mentioned, when he's on the field, he finds ways of junking in the era of what Tom Rockcliffe and Dane Swan used to. His points per minute when he's on the field is absolutely sensational. But when we look at a guy that we are spending a lot of money on, like a lot of money on, is he durable? Well, the answer is yes. Does he score in all the key components we need a premium to? The answer is yes. Does he have a ceiling that is high enough to put the C or VC on most weeks to justify the high cash outlay in our starting squad? Well, the answer is yes. Is his basement scores high enough so that if he does happen to have a bad week, it's not taking away from those ceiling games? Well, yeah, he barely, in fact, I don't think he dropped under 80 all year across the formats. And then the kicker, which I suppose is maybe a double-edged sword, he's lowly owned, which means if he delivers the way he ended last year, or delivered across the year, really, in totality, you're away with a gun captain, vice captain, no one owning. Like, the only format that's open right now is AFL Fantasy, and he's in just on 2% of teams. So that's the upside of this lowly ownership. I suppose the opposite angle, Kane, and I'm keen on your take on this, is if you do spend the amount of cash it will take to get Jarryd Lyons, and there's a little bit of a slower start, maybe it's because you believe Brisbane might drop a couple of their games early. Maybe it's because you do believe some of that centre bounce rotation changes. I don't think it does, but maybe that's the narrative you're telling yourself. Then all of a sudden, when a big premium slows early and it's unique, that's when it really hurts.
Yeah, again, that risk is really for any player, isn't it? So,
Yeah.
You could say the same thing about anyone in the competition. You know, I think the good thing with Lyons is, you know, he's going to be there every week.
Yes.
I think at worst you're going to get a guy that's right on a top 8 level. So he's not a guy that I see you going, wow, this didn't work, and I'm going to have to trade him out. Like, you're just going to be stuck with him. You'll have to build around him. Clearly, you're picking him because you want the hot start. That's why you pick these guys.
Exactly right.
If you're going Lions, you're probably not going to say, you can't have all of them. You know, you can't have all of them. So if you're looking at the schedule and you think, yeah, I think maybe Miller starts slow, or I think there's concerns about him or any of the other really big midfielders, and you take Lions, you're chasing an edge. You're hoping that even if it's just 10 points a week, maybe it's 10 points a week, and this is where it gets interesting with these really big price guys.
Yeah.
If that's your captaincy, 10 points a week can become 20. Now, as you mentioned, anytime you take a gamble like that, that 20 could be coming against you as well.
Yes.
But if you really believe, why is no one picking this guy? You know, the run home was incredible. Brisbane's a great team. I think he's going to fly out of the gate. Well, pick him. Back it in.
Yep.
And maybe you will be up 20 points a week on the pack.
Correct.
Just by having this unique player and putting the C on him. Again, there's only one person can win. So you've really got to take an educated guess and a punt some of the time. And I think Lyons is a guy that people who pick him, that's what they're hoping for. They're hoping that there is a 40% ownership of a Steele or a McRae or
a Miller.
Miller. And they're going against him. And I think they see the downside is, as I said, probably top 8, maybe even top 6 or top 5.
Mm-hmm.
And the upside is, yeah, he could be the number 1 scorer in the league. He has that build, and he finished the game in that fashion. So, again, like we say with these guys, if he flies out the gate, you hope you put people in a bind. You know, you get a guy that goes at 130 for the first 5 weeks, price goes up, people have to either let him go or pay overs.
Yeah.
And that can be really, really tricky. So that's what a unique is. Again, it's always got a risk to burn you, but if you're chasing the pointy end, that's a move you have to make at some point. You've got to differentiate yourself in some way. So I can't see anything that's a massive flag. Now, there's always somewhat of a risk if it's a career year.
Yep.
You know, does that 160 become a 140? Does that 140 become a 120?
Yeah.
And that's how the average falls away a little bit.
Yep.
Again, the floor can't really be improved upon.
No.
That could be somewhat of a knock, but I think he's right around the mark. I think, again, in terms of picking him, squad structure is probably going to be
that's the definer, isn't it?
Because you're probably going to have to. It's going to be hard to have more than 2 of Steele, Miller,
Mitchell,
McRae, Lyon. Like, probably only going to have 2 of the real big dogs. I think Neil's going to be irresistible at his price,
especially in SuperCoach.
In SuperCoach, he's almost a walk up. There might be people who think a Walsh or a Brayshaw would take that next step and match a Lyons at a cheaper price.
Yes.
So there's a heap of reasons that you can skip on him, and I think price is that primary reason.
Yeah.
But again, we could be sitting here in 12 months saying another season where Jarryd Lyons was in less than 5% of teams for the whole year.
Yeah, and he was in the top 5 midfielders across it. If you want to look at that first few weeks, because that is the key. If you're starting him, it's not only because you're trying to bank that you think he's going to be among, if not the top midfielder in that echelon for the year, is you're banking on him flying out of the gate and going, I'm taking on a Tuke Miller or a Jack Steele or a Jackson McRae. I'm banking on a narrative of them slowing a little bit and Lyons continuing or increasing what he did. The first 6 weeks for Brisbane, they take on Port Adelaide at the Gabba, round 2, Marvel Stadium. Again, this is obviously before any bubbles or COVID or anything like that. Essendon round 2, North Melbourne round 3 back at the Gabba. GMHBA against the Cats. That might be the danger game, given what he averaged last year in contrast to previous encounters of other teams. Collingwood at the Gabba round 5. And then the matchup that probably does get coaches a little bit excited is he does love to beat up on his old team Gold Coast, and he's got them round 6. So I think that's the story you're telling yourself if you're starting is, I think, Tuke Miller, let's pick one player rather than anything. I think Tuke regresses because of A, B, C, D reasons, of emergence of other kids, a less dependency on him, others in the back line playing a more centralised role. He doesn't need to float back there as much. I still see Lyons junking here, there and everywhere. Neil's not impacting him. The scoring differential in wins, I think the Lions start well because he does score better in wins than losses. So therefore, I will start Lyons. That is the mindset of how you start him. But you, like you said brilliantly, to take him on, you go, well, I think Josh Kelly, who we've already added in the 50 most relevant, who's got 10 points per game of value, is cheaper. So I'll jump on him. Or I'll jump on an Andy Brayshaw, who I think could be comparable. That's the reason you choose to take on Lyons and look to him as an upgrade, is you think the guys that are 5, 10, 15 points cheaper will deliver what he does.
Yeah, 100%, AJ, and that's where you have to differentiate between why people pick these players in salary cap and how they rank them
Yeah.
in draft, because there has to be a cash consideration. 50K might not sound like much, but if you're saving 50K on all your premiums, you can do a fair bit with 500K. You can take a rookie to a premium. So that's where you really have to be frugal with your cash. And if you think that Kelly's going to be on par with Lyons, you're not going to start Lyons, are you?
No.
You really have to think there's a separation there. And I think it is hard to believe that there's more than 3 points to 5 points of upside in Lyons. So I can really understand why some people are going to say, yep, I'm just going to wait and see.
Yeah.
If he falls to me at the right week when I'm upgrading and I can afford him, great.
Yep.
But it does get hard. But I think in draft,
Oh, yeah.
he's really interesting. And he's a guy that, with that average to his name, I think he's inside the top 26.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, I agree. There's a world in Dream Team and Fantasy or Ultimate Footy Leagues, I do see a world where he could be a first rounder. Depending on how many coaches you have in your league, I do see that world. But I probably think it's more likely in the second round somewhere is where he goes. But the downside, like the worst I could see him performing is 105 to 110. Like that's the worst I think he could go, barring injury.
Let's think about him. How many mids are going to go before him? Miller, Steele, McRae, Mitchell will go before him.
Across the formats.
The bulk of
yes.
league.
Yep, across the
There's
formats, that's fair.
If we're doing a 10-team draft, I think Grundy's going to be in that first round.
Probably Taranto or Duncan in the forward line, depending on the formats. Maybe even Dunkley.
Yeah. And again, some people will feel really good about maybe Jake Lloyd.
Yep.
So now, really, he's probably on the fringe of even sneaking into the first round. And again, we haven't even got to your Kellys, your Olivers, your Walshes,
Neil, his teammate.
Merritt. These type of guys that a lot of people feel really good about. So I think he's the type of guy where, ideally, I reckon, you've got pick one in the draft. You take a big boy. You take your Steele.
Yep.
Type, just say.
Yeah, sure.
Your 10-team draft, you hang loose to about pick 20. And if he falls right into your lap, happy days. And if he doesn't, you're probably going to get, a Merritt, an Oliver, Petrarca. One of these guys will also be there if he's not. So I think, you probably don't need to be really pushing the envelope on it. But again, I think it's going to be hard for him to burn you, even if you took him at pick 7 or 8, which is probably the earliest he could ever go. It's probably not going to be much of a burn because, as you mentioned, 105 and 20 plus games. It's going to have to be a pretty severe injury for him to miss. He's not prone to anything based on his history.
No,
so
not yet.
it would have to be something out of the blue. But again, there's no reason he couldn't be the number one scorer. Like I said, if he does keep going how he went post-bye, then that would have had him number one last year. Again, you can say that for a lot of players different years, but he has shown long stretches of being an elite player. And I think in draft has probably been the place where people have enjoyed him the most.
Yeah, for a long time, not just over the past 2 to a bit seasons. So, look, he's a fascinating player. And really, like we said at the top of the episode, the takeaway is this. At the very least, you've got to consider him because not enough people are. They're discounting him for whatever reason, and I think that's a myth to discount. He must be considered and looked at because he could be one of, if not the best midfielders for us in 2022. And so if you haven't looked at him, if you haven't considered him, about face, and at least do that, if nothing else. Hey, Kane, appreciate your work today on the 50 Most Relevant.
No worries, MJ. Thank you.
A pleasure. If you want to read the article with all those stats and breakdowns that we talked about throughout this episode, you can at coachespanel.tv. It has got also all the links to join our Patreon supporter group where they were able to get this podcast 24 hours early. Yep, they're ahead of the game. It only takes a couple of bucks a month to get involved. All the links at coachespanel.tv. We're back again tomorrow with another episode of the 50 Most Relevant, number 36. And it's been a while since I've done a breakout player. arguably, some might say I've not really done a breakout player that could become a premium in 2022 for the 50 most relevant yet. So fine, I'll do a breakout player. Is he, like all good breakout candidates, is he fool's gold? Or does he just need someone to give him an opportunity to prove that he is a premium performer and could be one of the best value picks if he fires in 2022? Who am I talking about? You'll find out tomorrow in the 50 most relevant.